She was a millionaire CEO who lost her wallet in the rain. He was a poor maintenance worker who gave her a few crumpled bills, unaware of her true identity. But when the truth came out, a gap not everyone dares to cross appeared. Is love strong enough to overcome prejudice? The first rain of the season fell lightly, not fiercely, just enough to make the road shimmer with streaks of light under the street lamps. Emma Hayes, in her long cream fur coat and elegant high heels, stood quietly at the deserted bus stop. Her wavy brown hair, slightly damp from the rain, fell loosely across her cheek, while her eyes remained fixed on her dead phone, as if staring hard enough might somehow recharge it. She sighed. A terrible day, and now here she was, a woman among the city's youngest CEOs, stranded on an unfamiliar street corner with no wallet, no phone, no assistant, utterly ridiculous and yet so very human. A few footsteps behind her paused. A low, warm male voice broke the silence, carrying a hint of playful charm. "Does the rain annoy you as much as it does me?" Emma turned. Standing before her was a man in his 30s, dressed simply in a black hoodie, faded jeans, and soaked sneakers. His angular face, tanned skin, and sea-blue eyes were calm yet sharp. She hesitated, wary for a moment, but then she nodded faintly, offering a tired smile. "I hate rain when I don't have a ride." Luke Carter raised an eyebrow, glancing at his own wet shoes before looking back at her, as if trying to figure out why someone clearly out of place here could be just as stuck as he was. "Need any help?" he asked, his gaze flickering to the bag she clutched tightly. Emma wavered. The pride of a successful woman urged her to refuse, but then she let out a soft sigh. "I lost my wallet and my phone's dead." He didn't laugh or act surprised. He just quietly pulled a few crumpled coins from his coat pocket. Just enough for a bus ticket. She looked at the coins, then at him. On one hand, the last few dollars of a stranger. On the other, her, a woman who could buy the entire bus company if she wanted. But right now she had no choice but to accept. And she did, gently. "Thank you. I'll pay you back. Just help someone else for me." Those words, simple, kind, touched her more deeply than the polished compliments of flashy investors. As the bus pulled up, Emma stepped aboard, glancing back at him through the rain-streaked window. He stood there, hands in his pockets, his gaze steady, unassuming. In that fleeting moment, on a strange, rainy afternoon, Emma, who always thought her heart was too busy to feel, felt her chest stir faintly for a stranger and his small act of kindness. The vending machine let out a sharp clunk as Luke pushed open the plastic flap and pulled out a soda can. The cold metal clung to his fingertips, not unlike the quiet unease creeping into his chest since early that morning. He wasn't one for gossip, nor did he care for the idle chatter of office workers, the polished world 10 floors up that he never felt he belonged to. But this time, fragments of conversation slipped through the cracked door between two women chatting by the coffee machine, and they made him pause, silently but fully alert. "Did you see Emma Hayes' new interview? Youngest CEO running a billion-dollar empire and so private. God, who doesn't know her? She owns this whole building." A chill ran down his spine. He stared at the soda can in his hand as if he'd misheard. Emma? No way. He'd thought she was just a senior executive, polished, capable, but still human. The woman who missed her bus in the rain. The one who pretended not to notice the office thermostat was broken just to call him in to fix it. The one who smiled at him, talked to him, quiet but never distant. Nothing like the people up there. But now, it all shattered. Luke straightened, the soda can biting cold in his grip. His mind raced to piece it together. The perfectly tailored suit, the spotless heels, the eyes of someone who could command a boardroom with a single nod. And him, just a guy who fixed light bulbs, cleaned air vents, thinking she was. Like him. What an idiot I am. He wasn't angry at who she was. He was angry at himself, for believing, for letting his heart graze something that was never his to touch. Every conversation, every glance she'd given him, now felt suspect. Did she know he was clueless about her real status? And if she did, had she stayed silent out of pity? That was what hurt most. He didn't recall how he got back to the maintenance room or how he finished his half-done tasks, but from that moment the way he looked at her changed. His polite greetings turned curt. The familiar smile was replaced by silence. He started avoiding her, deliberately, disciplined, because if he didn't, he feared he'd let himself believe again, and a guy like him couldn't afford to be that foolish twice. Emma stepped into the maintenance floor hallway, her high heels clicking sharply against the cold silence. She'd never been here, not since she bought the building. But today, she needed to see Luke. Not in a boardroom, not with a nod in the elevator. Right here, where he worked every day. And there he was, hunched over a toolbox, his back to her. "Luke," she called softly. He looked up. Their eyes met. A brief pause. But in that moment, Emma saw what she'd feared was true. His gaze held no trace of warmth. "Miss Hayes," he said flatly, distant. Her hand tightened, fingers trembling in her coat pocket. "Can we talk for a moment? What do you need?" His tone stayed even but sharper, like a blade's edge. Emma swallowed hard. "I know you know. That you're the CEO of this whole place?" He gave a faint, bitter smile, not looking up. "Yeah, not hard to figure out when they plaster your face on magazines." "I didn't mean to hide it," she said quickly. "I just didn't think I was important enough to tell." He looked up now, for real. His eyes pierced hers, raw with hurt. "Or did you enjoy that a guy like me, fixing pipes, had no clue who he was dealing with?" Emma froze. "It's not like that." Her voice cracked. "I didn't think I'd get hurt." He stood, tall and silent, but his eyes were screaming. "Emma, I'm not a kid. I just didn't expect the person I thought I could trust to make me feel this stupid." The air shattered. She took a step forward. "Luke, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to turn out like this. I never thought you'd mean this much to me. But you let it happen," he cut in. "You let me believe you were someone else, someone I could reach." Emma couldn't hold back her tears. She turned away, hands shaking. "I just want you to know I never once looked down on you." "But you're still up there," he said. "And you didn't come down, not until I was out of your sight." Silence stretched between them. Then Luke turned back to his toolbox, as if their conversation had never happened. Emma left quietly, tears falling one by one onto the cold concrete floor. They'd been so close once, but now they were further apart than 1,000 skies. Luke stood before the mirror in his cramped rental room, the dim yellow light casting shadows on his face, tired, gaunt, and tinged with something like helplessness. He'd just returned from a night shift, clothes stained with grease, hands numb from gripping tools for hours. But the weight dragging him down wasn't physical. It was the message from an unknown number. "Next week's seminar at the Ellington Hotel. Ms. Hayes has recommended inviting you as an honored technical representative. Please confirm." He stared at the screen, then tossed the phone onto the table. "Honored." Luke gave a bitter laugh. What did they think? That inviting him to a fancy conference, dressing him in a suit, seating him among rich men in red ties would move him to tears? That he'd feel worthy? No. He didn't need their handouts to feel valued, especially not from someone like Emma. She was everything he'd once thought was out of his reach, not just because of her status, but because of how she could walk into a room and silence it, everyone hanging on her every word, and him. He'd show up, wipe the sweat from his brow, and slip through the crowd without a single person bothering to remember his name. He thought back to that evening, sitting together in the small coffee shop down the street. She'd talked about her childhood, the days she felt lost in her own mansion. He'd thought, they were alike, two lonely souls adrift in worlds no one understood, until he learned the truth. She wasn't like him. She'd never been part of his simple dreams. And worse, He'd let himself believe he could reach her. Luke glanced at the message again, then deleted it without hesitation. He didn't need to step into that world just to be their inspiring story of rising above. He wasn't their proof. He was just a man with grease-stained hands and a battered sense of pride, torn apart for letting his heart stir for someone beyond his grasp. He didn't blame her for being a CEO. He blamed himself for dreaming. A dream too high, too bright, so when it shattered, it left only tiny shards piercing his heart. Luke threw on his jacket, stepped out of the room, head low, footsteps heavy as if carrying the weight of his insecurities on his back. From today, he'd let no one touch that pride again, not even the woman he'd once loved most. The office building grew dim as the clock neared 8 in the evening. Emma Hayes sat in the top-floor boardroom. A newly approved project plan spread before her, but her eyes weren't on the text. She was quiet, utterly silent. Not the silence of work, but of a heart slowly retreating from something far deeper. Her phone lay still on the table, no new messages from Luke. It had been 3 weeks since they'd last truly spoken. Not the awkward good mornings in the hallway, not the glances that dodged each other in passing, but a real conversation, a moment of peace without pretense. She'd tried. She'd sent the invitation to the conference, hoping it would remind him she believed in him, that their divide wasn't just about status. But he didn't show. Didn't reply. At first she was angry. Angry he'd rejected the opportunity. Angry he didn't trust her. But now, after 3 weeks of waiting in silence, that anger had turned into something else. Something quieter, sharper, like water seeping through stone, silent but eroding the fragile layers within her. Emma stood, walked to the glass window and looked down at the city below, where she'd once met a stranger by chance, and where her heart had first learned what it meant to feel truly seen. He'd shown her a world beyond car windows and financial reports, taught her a shared umbrella in the rain could salvage a ruined day. But he'd also shown her that sometimes feelings couldn't overcome every insecurity. Not everyone was ready to be loved. She sighed, soft but heavy. In that moment, Emma Hayes, the youngest CEO in the history of Hayes Corporation, made a choice she rarely did. She let go. Not because she was weak, not because she stopped loving, but because she understood that love couldn't always mean chasing someone who kept turning away. She picked up her phone, typed a message. "I won't try anymore, Luke. Not because I don't want to, but because I respect you enough to stop holding on. Be well." Her finger brushed the send button. A second later, it dissolved into the quiet night. Emma turned from the window, walked out of the boardroom, her steps steady and slow. She didn't look back, but in her heart, a space had formed, beautiful, sad, and achingly real. On the first day Luke stepped into the small workshop he'd rented on the outskirts of town, only 3 things awaited him: a scratched old workbench, the sharp smell of paint, and a fragile belief he'd pieced back together after life's upheaval. No more Emma's gentle brown eyes, no more afternoon chats at the rundown coffee shop. It was all summed up in 2 words: the past. And the past he left behind. He didn't need pity. He certainly didn't need anyone handing him opportunities like a favor. Opportunities were his to seize. With his hands, his mind, everything he had. Mornings began at 5 a.m. Luke opened the workshop, swept the dust, checked every screw, every fan blade, every electromechanical system. He fixed things people discarded. He improved water filters for poor households. He built handmade assistive devices for the disabled. Not for fame, but to prove that technical work didn't need glamour to make a real difference. At night he studied. He enrolled in online courses on entrepreneurship, taught himself financial management, wrote business plans. Each page of notes was a brick laid on the path to becoming someone he could be proud of. Some days, rain poured, the tin roof leaked, the printer broke, orders were late, clients canceled. Some nights, Luke passed out at his desk, back aching, eyes bloodshot. But he didn't let himself collapse. He wasn't doing this to forget Emma. He was doing it for himself. He needed to know he could stand tall, without pitying love, without hollow praise. He needed to know his worth wasn't tied to being a maintenance worker or the guy a CEO helped. He was Luke Carter, a man who could rebuild a future from ruins with his own hands. Word of him spread. A few independent journalists came, writing about the community-focused devices he created. Charities placed orders. People started calling his tiny workshop Carter Tech Works. But Luke didn't get caught up in the news spotlight. He kept his head down, worked, lived frugally, let his calloused hands stay grounded in reality, because he knew recognition only held real value when he no longer craved it. And each time he glanced at the project plan pinned to the wall, handwritten, still smudged and messy, Luke whispered to himself, "You don't need to be the richest, just strong enough to never be broken again." He didn't know what tomorrow held, but he knew every step forward was a day closer to the man he'd vowed to become, and this time he wouldn't stop, even if he walked alone. From the 15th floor boardroom window, Emma could see the weathered tin roof of a small workshop nestled in the industrial district. She'd seen him there, shirt soaked, hands stained with grease, but eyes alight with an unnamed conviction. Luke had changed, no longer the shy man who ducked his head before a polished CEO in a suit. Now he was the one steering his own path, with rough hands and a steadfast heart. And Emma, though still anchored in meetings with investors and corporate restructuring plans, found her heart softening each time she thought of him. She didn't seek him out, didn't call, didn't text, but she did more than that. She sent an email to Stacy, who ran the new venture capital fund under the company's CSR division, with a single line, "Look into Carter Tech Works," promising. No signature, no mention of who recommended it. She quietly approved a small grant from the Community Innovation Fund for a disability aid project Luke had proposed, not because he was an old acquaintance, not out of love, but because it deserved it, because he was doing what was right. She tipped off a few independent journalists, the kind who still believed in real stories about real people. The first articles appeared quietly, no fanfare, no PR, but enough to give Luke the recognition his work earned. Emma didn't want thanks. She just needed him to stand tall, not to come back to her, but to look at himself with pride, no longer wounded, no longer weighed by inferiority, no longer fearing love was a trap of disparity. At night, after long meetings, she'd sit alone on her balcony, a cold cup of tea in hand, eyes drifting to the streets below. From afar, the light in Luke's workshop still glowed. She knew he was working, and she smiled. Once during a lunch break, Emma visited the workshop, but didn't go inside. She left a small cloth bag at the door. Inside, a new pair of work gloves, a leather notebook, and an unsigned note. "You're on the right path. Don't forget to take care of yourself." She was gone before he opened the door. Love didn't always mean being present. Sometimes it meant stepping back, watching someone grow in the way they needed. For Emma, love was no longer about possession or clinging. It was a choice, to trust, to sacrifice, to stand in the shadows where he couldn't see, quietly cheering every step he took. Whether he ever knew or never did, it didn't matter. Because true love never needed the spotlight to exist. The coffee in Emma's hand had long gone cold. She sat motionless in the corner of the small cafe, where soft golden light spilled down, blurring the line between reality and thought. She hadn't planned to come here. Her feet had just carried her, like an unconscious habit. Across from her sat Margaret, a seasoned financial advisor and a close friend of her mother's. They hadn't met since a conference 3 years ago. Emma hadn't intended to share anything deep, but Margaret broke the silence first. "You look more tired than usual, Emma." She gave a faint smile, dodging. "Just work stress, that's all." Margaret said nothing. She took a slow sip of tea and set the cup down. "Your mother was a lot like you," she said, gazing into the distance. "Successful, independent, but always carrying an emptiness inside that no one could see." Emma felt her chest tighten. She didn't respond. Margaret turned back to her, eyes full of empathy. And then one day, she realized the worst thing wasn't failure. It was success with no one to share it with. The words struck the deepest part of Emma, the part she'd tried to lock away. She forced a smile. I don't think I'm like her. I have a clear path. I know what I want. But are you sure you know who you want? Margaret asked, gentle but piercing. Emma froze. Luke's face flashed in her mind. His eyes the last time they met, resolute yet full of loss, and the evenings he no longer appeared. His absence, once just a void, had become a quiet, gnawing ache. He thinks he's not good enough, Emma whispered, admitting it for the first time. And did you tell him otherwise? She fell silent. The words she'd wanted to say had reached her lips countless times, only to be swallowed back. She was afraid of hurting him, of trampling his pride, but she'd forgotten silence was its own kind of rejection. I thought helping him from a distance was enough. I thought as long as he was okay, that was fine, but I feel further away than ever. Margaret nodded. Sometimes love isn't just stepping back to let someone grow. It's stepping forward when they're ready. Emma looked at her, voice trembling. But what if he doesn't need me anymore? Then at least you'll know you didn't lose him because you stayed silent. A quiet moment passed. Emma lowered her head, her heart a storm of emotions. Confusion, regret, fear of loss, and a fragile hope that hadn't yet faded. For the first time, she realized strength wasn't always knowing what to do, but daring to face the unknown. She looked up. I think I need to find him. Margaret smiled, resting her hand lightly on Emma's. Go. Sometimes all someone needs is for you to step forward, to know they're worthy of being loved. The air in the grand conference hall was perfectly controlled, cool, professional, and distant. Emma stood in the front row, representing the board of the newly established investment fund, an event unveiling standout startups set to receive funding and strategic support. She wore a beige blazer, hair neatly pinned up, her familiar sharp gaze intact. People swarmed her with congratulations, camera flashes blinked relentlessly, and the hum of investment promises echoed around her. But then, a name announced from the stage made time slow. Founder of Blue Sprout Environmental Technology, Luke Callahan. Emma looked up. He stepped out from the wings. A carefully pressed navy shirt. Hair still slightly tousled, as always, but his eyes were different. Calm, steady, and distant. The room watched him like a rising star, and Emma, who once knew him from grease-stained evenings, now stood on the sidelines, just like everyone else. She didn't approach, didn't smile, just observed in silence, the silence of someone mature enough to know some things are best kept private. Luke presented his project with a firm, passionate yet measured voice. Every sentence, every chart, every point proved a man who'd earned his place through sheer ability. He was no longer the grease-covered maintenance worker of years past. He was a CEO, a man with vision. Emma knew how far he'd come, and she wondered, back then, would he have dared to stand on this stage without bowing his head? For a brief moment their eyes met, 1 second long enough to recognize each other, short enough for neither to react. No smile, no nod, just two people, seeing each other across different worlds. Emma looked away first. She wasn't sad, wasn't angry, just felt a strange quiet, like life had closed an old chapter without needing an epilogue. When the program ended, Luke left the stage, swarmed by potential investors. Emma watched from a distance, not stepping in, not signaling. She wasn't his savior. That no longer mattered. What mattered was he'd saved himself. A colleague sidled up to Emma, teasing lightly, "Wow, this Callahan guy really made an impression." Emma nodded, replying softly, "He deserves it." That night, as she left the hall under dim golden lights and the chill of the city evening, Emma felt no regret. She'd helped him in silence, loved him with grace. But now, what she carried wasn't pain. It was a quiet maturity, where love was no longer about holding on, but about acknowledging, if fate allowed, people would find their way back, and if not, at least, they'd crossed paths with the best of each other. Late afternoon, the sun cast its final golden rays on the skyscrapers. The meeting room on the 42nd floor was silent after a long session, with only the faint hum of wind beyond the glass. Emma stood by the window, clutching a stack of documents but not looking at them. Her mind was on that look, Luke's gaze at the gala, when they'd locked eyes, wordless. Nearly a year had passed since they'd last truly spoken. Now everything was different. She was still Emma, calm, commanding CEO, but deep inside a void lingered, unfilled. A knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened. Luke Callahan stepped in, no more technician's uniform, no trace of old awkwardness, just a grown man, eyes steady, holding a small box. He stood there a moment, then said softly, "I don't have an appointment, but I need to talk to you." Emma nodded, wordless, moving to the chair across from him and sitting down. The air wasn't tense but quiet, like both had learned to listen. Luke opened the box. Inside, a faded old bus ticket. "I kept it," he said, "because it was the first time you saw me, not with pity, but with trust, and I lost that, along with you." Emma's grip tightened. She hadn't expected him to keep it, the ticket from that rainy day when she was the one needing help and he was the only one who didn't care about her status. "It took me a long time to understand," Luke continued, "that love doesn't need perfect equality in status. It needs honesty, courage, and patience." He looked into her eyes. "I'm sorry for pushing you away, for leaving you alone in your hurt, but you were still there, helping me silently, without anyone knowing. You never stopped believing in me, not once." Emma turned away, tears falling quietly, not from sadness, but because at last, what she'd waited for had come. "I don't need apologies," she said softly. "I just need to know. Are you happy with the path you've chosen?" Luke nodded. "Yes. But without you, it's never been complete." He pulled out a small envelope, handed it to her. "I wrote this so many times, tore it up, wrote again. You can read it later. But now I just want to ask." He stood, took a breath. "Can we start again? Not where we left off, but from where we've both truly grown." Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward. No rushed embrace, no dramatic tears, just a hand clasp, gentle, firm, full of trust. "I never left," she smiled. "We were just finding each other the right way." From that day, their meetings were no longer chance. Their talks were no longer polite formalities. They began again, slowly, deliberately, responsibly. Luke stopped trying to prove himself. Emma stopped forcing strength. They learned to walk side by side, equal, not more, not less, just two scarred souls choosing to stay and heal together. One afternoon in the old cafe where they'd once sat silently over business coffee, Luke asked softly, "Do you think love after pain lasts longer?" Emma smiled, resting her hand on his. "When two people choose to stay after all they've lost, it's not just love anymore. It's a promise. Some stories make us believe that true love doesn't see status or circumstances. It sees the heart." Thank you for joining us on Millionaire and Heart Stories. See you again on the next heartfelt journey.